What would your first reaction be if I were to tell you that there are three absolute prerequisites to freedom? Three requirements for maintaining liberty. Now, if I were in your shoes, I would be skeptical right now because I personally don't like this kind of list, especially when they make the claim to be absolute. But I've been thinking about this particular subject pretty intensely, and I've come to the conclusion that in this particular case, there really are three elements that must be attained and maintained in order for personal freedom to survive. Now, before I jump into it and give you my thesis on it, take a second and think about it for yourself. You might even consider pressing the pause button so you don't feel rushed. Now, I'm going to lay these out in what I consider to be the order of importance, with the first element being the most crucial. Now, you're probably going to be surprised to hear me say this, but the first and most important element of maintaining freedom is emotional. It's a very scary thing to stand up to authority. It's a very frightening thing to stand up to a tyrant. And if you haven't developed emotional strength in your life, if you haven't developed courage, then no line that you ever draw in the sand is going to ever count for anything. And courage, to me, is not defined by what you do when you have the advantage. Courage, to me, is defined when you stand to lose everything, or in fact, will probably lose everything. If you stand up to a tyrant, the stakes are very high. You risk being destroyed financially. You risk losing your freedom. And you risk being killed. So regardless of what physical weapons you may have and what knowledge you may possess, if you are not ready and strong enough to face death and to face losing everything, then you will only have your freedom as long as no one else tries to take it from you. The second most important element is intellectual. You can't defend your rights if you don't know what your rights are. The uninformed citizen is completely at the mercy of those who place themselves in positions of authority. But even knowing your rights isn't enough. You have to be vigilant. You have to be wise enough to recognize deception, to recognize when someone is trying to sneak your rights away from you. And the last and final element is you have to have the means to defend yourself physically. In the Bronze Age, that might have meant having a sword or a bow and arrow. Today, it means having a gun. Now, I place the ability to defend yourself last on the list of the lowest of priority, but that does not mean in any way, shape, or form that it can be replaced. Physical self-defense should be the last resort in any situation. However, if you do not have the ability to defend yourself physically, it will influence the other two elements in a negative way. One thing I've learned from having lived in some bad neighborhoods and having been through some sketchy situations is that knowing how to handle yourself, knowing that you can fight if you have to, is one of the biggest protections that you can have. You see, someone who knows how to fight, someone who knows that they can defend themselves, carries themselves differently than a person who doesn't. Now, there's one thing that human predators and non-human predators have in common. They can both smell weakness. They can both sense fear. Now, I'm going to take these three principles. I'm going to draw them together into one statement to make it all clear. In order to be free, you have to have the courage to stand up for yourself. And you have to have the intelligence to know when to stand up and to know what your rights are. And if worse comes to worse, you have to have the ability to back it up physically. Now, in the United States, those first two principles are all but lost. And even though we've managed to hold on to the right to bear arms in this country, it's not enough to keep us free.